Hi there, YouTube. This is extremewirehead, and this is another Cardfight Vanguard clan intro, specifically for the clan Tachikaze. In this series, I look into the introductions of a clan. I want to look at what makes the clan interesting, how it interacts in the greater scheme of Cardfight Vanguard, but otherwise just as a beginner looking in. We're not going to be looking at the most expensive, the most powerful, or the most meta cards given into a clan. Rather, we're looking at how their strategy, how their engine is different from everybody else's, and how their cards shape that way of thinking. And in this case, when we have a discussion about a clan, I want to delve into how they were conceived in the first place. And in the case of Tachikaze, it is a clan of robot dinosaurs, and there are very few things I find more enjoyable than talking about weird ideas lumped together, much like every single thing Bushiroad ever seems to come up with. In the case of Tachikaze, they created a clan based around a bunch of dinosaurs who are also robots with lasers, rocket launchers, and all sorts of manner of gizmos stuck upon each other. In some cases, it involves savages involved in this greater scheme of things, but the main focus really is on the robot dinosaurs. So, the clan itself functions very similarly to one of the other clans well known in this game called the Shadow Paladin, but the difference is they have a more aggressive play on the entire subtype, and they control this by means of more and much more aggressive ways of killing your own units in favor of power, and sometimes even the rear guards do it to themselves in a very, very apt introduction to the cycle of life and the cannibalism that happens within the clan. So let's get down to it. We are first going to look at the G4, Archrider. Archrider is a particularly interesting card for a couple of reasons. It is a stride when this unit attacks the Vanguard. Pay the cost, which is retire a rearguard. If you do, you get an additional 5,000 power, and when it hits, your opponent must retire a rearguard of your opponent's choice, not your choice. Now, in terms of usefulness, I actually dislike this card because it means that if they guard the card, they will probably not have to pay the cost anyway, and it does mean that it kind of gimps yourself for just 5k power, which in some cases is maybe a bit too expensive, but in general it activates a lot of the other skills in the clan, and it is only strong because it is in Tachikaze. I'll say that much. Otherwise, it would have been just a mediocre card. That's the only G4 I want to look at, because in general that's the only card I want to look at in the G4. A lot of the G4s, when we talk about Tachikaze, involve combo plays and complicated things. I don't want to delve into too deep into those things, but rather just an overview of how the clan works. What you have to understand, many of them will kill your rear guards. So let's get down to how this plays out in the other parts of the deck. The first card I want to look at in the G3 is a very interesting card because of how it revolutionized the way of thinking of Tachikaze when it came out. The first G3, of course, is Ancient Dragon's Spino Driver. Now, I don't usually talk about break rides because I think you should learn those things on your own, but just to break it down to you, when you ride another unit on top of it, stuff happens. In this case, retire 2 of your Tachikaze rear guards, and you may draw 2 cards. The Vanguard then gets 10,000 and an extra crit. Very simple. No counterblast cost, nothing like that. But in general, it cycles your clan. It cycles the deck. It plays faster. It activates the effects when things die. It makes everything happen all at once, and it all happens during your ride phase, which is a very interesting timing to look at all of these different things. You'll see later on, though, that since then Tachikaze has moved more into the battle phase and the main phase, and because of those changes, this card doesn't see any play. But it is still good to know that you are talking about a clan that will aggressively kill its own units, and we are going to have to look at some of the other cards to figure out how you can make it worthwhile for you. The next 2 cards I want to look at are not really, for a better word, cards that are deemed meta or in any reasonable fashion would be deemed as useful in any format. But they are interesting because they do allow you to make a lot of really, really fancy plays. The next G3 is Destruction Dragon Dark Rex. Dark Rex skill is choose a Tachikaze on your rear guard, and it gets 3k at the cost of binding this from hand to the bind zone. From the bind zone, you can retire a bunch of your rear guards for the cost of doing so. You will then create this situation that allows him to superior ride in the middle of the battle phase, making a sort of maybe restand. It actually isn't that worth it in many cases, but it is something that you can always keep in the back of your head. It is essentially an extra attack that can be timed at any moment when you need it, and you don't have to use it on the turn or any other until you actually need it, which means that in terms of a toolboxy approach to the way Tachikaze does things, it is very strong and very, very versatile. Ever since then, it hasn't seen much play. There have been ways that we have been creating to make this a thing again, but I haven't seen it too much, so don't put too much thought into it. But if you were starting out and you just wanted to play with how aggressive you can be, this is a card that really shows it off very well. This last G3 that I want to look at is probably not something you were expecting to see. From the second set, the very second set of this game, Chaos Dragon Dino Chaos. From hand, choose 2 of your rear guards and retire them. If you have a grade 2 Vanguard, you may reveal this card if you do ride it. A superior ride that can be done on the G2 at the cost of 2 cards in your hand, meaning that you do lose out on 1 card, I believe, and it does speed things along a little bit. In terms of card advantage, you do gain it back in the subsequent turn since you do get your twin drive 1 turn earlier, but it still hurts a whole lot since we are talking about the first 2 turns of the game. But because of the way the stride works and how all these timings play into each other, it is very, very strong for many, many, many different reasons, and it is still something that I want to play with. It is cheap, it is very easy to find. It does teach you how expensive Tachikaze's playstyle can be, and if you can get your hands on some, I would love you to play test with it because I think that it does give you the correct mindset when you're looking into Tachikaze. Going down to the G2, we are going to spend almost the entirety of the rest of this segment on the G2 because they are so important to the clan. When we are talking about retiring and calling things, I think the G2 are particularly powerful because they are interchangeable with 3s and 1s and mean that you can definitely kill them off quite easily. The first card is a card that I don't usually talk about. We don't usually look at subclans because I think they involve too much technicality. But let's get down to it. Ancient Dragon Dino Crowd. Ancient Dragon Dino Crowd is particularly useful because it shows you that in Tachikaze, not just the Vanguard kills things. In Shadow Paladin, the purpose of the rear guards are to be eaten, and the rear guard's job is to multiply and make it easier for the Vanguard to be very, very powerful. In the case of Tachikaze, you have to think a little bit differently because not only are the rear guards fodder, they themselves are carnivorous monsters. And because of that, we have cards like this which gain power by retiring their own rear guards. And it becomes a case of playing with the numbers and seeing how many attacks you actually want, which order you're going to do things. In the flip side, of course, then your opponent can then see which ones you might be more likely to go into. The next G2 I want to look at is Assault Dragon Pachyphalos, I believe, is when this unit attacks. If your Tachikaze had been put into the drop zone during this turn, this unit gets 3k until the end of that battle. It's not particularly a powerful card by itself, but it does show you that just because cards die, not necessarily that they affect the rear guard in question, it does strengthen the other cards, and it is kind of strange that it works like that, but it does. The cards in general get power off things dying, even if they aren't involved, or if they are involved, as we'll see later down the line. But you have to watch out for all of these different combinations. It does make them really, really versatile, I would say. The next G2 is one that has been around very, very since basically the beginning of Tachikaze's rule into a clan. Winged Dragon / Taro. During your battle phase, if it's put to the drop zone, choose a Tachikaze gets 3k. If it is killed, you get power to your other units, furthering the power boost that they get. Or you can choose to try and revive it and make some other plays. These kinds of questions mean that you're going to have a question of toolboxing when it comes to this clan, trying to figure out which is more important, what to prioritize, what do you need more of, and they do have a lot of options in many of these different cases. Case in point, we're looking at the last G2. Tank Mammoth, also known as the Jesus Mammoth in the Tachikaze community, is a very, very powerful card for one very good reason. It works at almost any time during your turn. Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1. If it is killed, call it back and it gets 3k, becoming an 11k. On many ways, this is very powerful because during the battle phase, it does give you an extra 11k attacker. In the case of during your own turn, when you have to pay for stuff to die, or for many cases where you would kill it, bring it back, reposition it, and attack again. There are just so many different combo plays, and it just because it doesn't have a GB means that you can even play this early into the game, late into the game. It is slightly expensive, but because of the heavy versatility and the low cost of many of the other cards, you are talking about a card that really does embody the greatness of Tachikaze. They will get more attacks than might feasibly should have happened at the cost of killing their own rear guards, but some of the rear guards just keep coming back for more. And lastly, the last card we're looking at is the G0 Baby Chimera. Baby Chimera is not particularly interesting, I would say, but it does show you one last aspect of the clan that I haven't delved into. Counterblast 1, when it's put to the drop zone, pick a G1, play it, and it gets 3k until end of turn. Some of the cards, some of the zeros, some of the other cards, they do have this evolve mechanic. When you retire a rear guard, it actually looks for a card 1, 2, or maybe even 3 grades higher than itself, and it means that there is some toolboxing that can be had in small amounts. Not very much, not of course like many of the other paladins, but it is there and it does exist. And because of that, you do have some leeway in terms of what you get. You don't have to blind draw in some cases, but you do have to work with what you've got, and this card allows some freedom of movement within that space. And I think that's it. Tachikaze is one of those simpler clans that is very complicated when you get down to it because of all the number of pieces that are involved. We are talking about a clan very similar to many of the other clans in the Dragon Empire. They have a problem of having a very expensive cost, but very explosive after effects. Learning which ones to use and in what order can really define a good player from a great player, and trying to understand how all of these pieces come together to maximize what you are up against is the key to figuring out whether or not this clan is for you. Tachikaze in general is capable of multiple attacks, very similar to stuff like Aquaforce. And they do this by killing their own rear guards and calling them back. If you notice, I didn't talk about the Strider. That's because that's where these combo plays and extra attacks will probably come out of. I don't want to talk about that too much because it overcomplicates the situation that I have right now. If we were to generalize, I do think that Tachikaze is a medium to maybe even beginner level deck. You do have pieces in here. You have some of the simpler cards. Some of the not so great cards are actually really good at teaching you, really good at giving you options and making a very toolboxy approach to the way of doing things. They do suffer from difficulty of drawing into what they need and have to make do with whatever shows up on the top of the deck. But otherwise, I do think they have a clear strategy and have a lot of freedom to change it up if need be depending on the opponent. One of the things though is once they've lost their rear guards, once everything's gone, all they have is a Vanguard that technically can't do anything because it needs to eat. Sadly, that's the biggest weakness of Tachikaze, and probably one of the things that holds them back in the greatest degree. That aside though, I do think they are still a great clan to get into, and one that involves a lot of fancy plays that can make some eyes turn just because of how amazing some of these combinations can become. That's it for me. If you do want to get into Tachikaze, I do think they are on the medium to low end of the scale, and you can get away with some of the cheaper options while you're learning it out. It is very expensive on the high end because some of these cards are very old, but on the low end, on the very low end, they are an excellent teacher. Anyway, this has been Extreme Wirehead, and I'll see you on the next clan intro. Peace.